Great to see you all this morning. I'm Olivia Midgley. I'm the editorial director at Farmers Guardian. And welcome to this session on preparing for IHT changes and a look ahead to the budget, the delayed budget, which is happening in about 3 weeks' time and beyond that. Farmers Guardian has been running its Save Britain's Family Farmers campaign, launched last October when the Chancellor announced swinging changes to the tax regime. And do come along to the Farmers Guardian stand, which is just kind of behind us here, for more information on how we can help you and support you in your business. But I'm delighted to say that we have two excellent speakers this morning. Lisa Millington, to my left, who is the Head of Agricultural Private Client Team at HCR Law. Now, HCR Law is actually teamed up with Farmers Guardian to offer free legal advice as part of a Farmers Guardian membership. So please do come along and see the Farmers Guardian stand and find out how you can benefit from this free legal advice. To Lisa's left, we also have Louise Speke, who is the Chief Tax Advisor at the CLA. Now, the CLA is running another tax session later this morning, so please do head to the CLA stand for that as well. So we'll get into it, and I'm going to come and sit with you guys. And I'd just like you to both introduce yourselves, please. And Lisa, start with you. But can you just set the scene and the context for the position that we're kind of in at the moment?
Yeah, okay. Morning, everybody. As Liv has introduced me, my name's Lisa Millington, and I head up a specialist team of private client solicitors at HCR Law. And that's a team that we've brought together coincidentally with last October's budget. We were doing it anyway, but it just seemed even more important than ever that we had that specialist offering available to you. So the members of my team, I would say sort of 80 to 90% of our workload is advising farmers and landowners, and we do all still do a little bit of our sort of general private client stuff as well. So I've spent my entire qualified year, coming up to 13, advising farmers and landowners on their succession planning. And before October last year, it wasn't that difficult, to be honest with you. From an inheritance tax planning point of view, we made sure that everything was where it needed to be and that the arrangements fit within the technical rules for agricultural relief and business relief where appropriate. And the main sort of thrust of the conversation was about the who's who. So who are the natural inheritors of the business? How can we be fair between farming, non-farming children and all that kind of stuff? And of course, October 30th last year, that changed quite significantly and the inheritance tax conversation became all the more important. What I've spent the last year or so doing is a little bit different to what I thought I was going to be doing if I'd come and sat here this time last year, because I thought we would be doing a lot of asset shifting, if I'm honest with you, over the last year. What I've spent the last year doing is helping people understand how the regime is going to apply to them, doing a bit of a stock take, figuring out exactly what there is, whose ownership it sits in, where it's designed to go at the end of the day, and what the tax cost of that is likely to be. And then once we've got that worst case scenario figure, if you like, we can then work back from it and put in place arrangements to help. In some cases, mitigate it. In some cases, fund it. In most cases, a mixture of the two.
Thanks, Lisa. That's a great introduction. Louise, can you just introduce yourself and tell us what you've been seeing amongst your membership?
Good morning, everybody. So I head up the tax team at the CLA. So for those of you who don't know us, we're the Country Land and Business Association. So we represent landowners, farmers and rural businesses. And a lot of our members are diversified businesses, which is why we have a stand at the show. We've been coming to the show since its inception. We spend our time advising our members. Our members get free advice from our advisors. I have a tax team. We spend, I think, certainly 3/4 of our time advising our members on succession planning. So that is doing a very similar role to Lisa, looking at the assets you have in your business, explaining how the tax laws apply to those assets and what your options are for actually passing the business and the management of that business on to the next generation. And that's what we talk about in the context of succession planning. It's about how do you get the assets down to the next generation with the least tax payable possible. And it is not something you have to do as a one-off. It doesn't have to be a knee-jerk reaction to the announcements from last year. But it is something that every business and every family should consider, and I think a lot of them don't. And our role is there to help them, as is Lisa's, to think about that and take the first steps.
Well, thank you both. And just to remind the audience that this session is for you, so please do raise your hand and ask a question, and we'll come round to you with a roving mic. So we've only got about 20 minutes now, so please do put your hands up at any point in the conversation. If anyone has got a question, please just raise their hand. So, Lisa, we talk about succession. We can't really talk about tax without talking about succession. And, we've been talking about it for so many years, haven't we, in terms of, there's reminders to get those business plans and those succession plans in place. What would you say have been the biggest barriers, and how can we address those barriers? Where do we start?
Well, on a practical level, I think that there's been a couple of key barriers, and one of them is time, to be honest with you. I do understand that you don't have the time to spend hours and hours poring over paperwork and having meetings with lawyers and accountants and land agents. There are 1,000,001 other things that you would rather be doing, and I do get that. And until now, it's sort of been okay. One of the other things is, of course, what we're talking about here is death, and nobody likes to talk about that, and I do understand that as well. So there's a time factor, there's a sort of a discomfort factor, but I think also, even if we can get over those two things, a lot of it is people just don't know where to start.
And the first bit of advice, Louise, if someone in this audience is thinking, yeah, I'm going to make a start on this, what would be the first step to take?
I think the first step to take is really to analyse what have you got, what assets have you got. We have a form that we send to members, which is a tool to help people set out what assets they've got. Do you know what the values of those assets are? And then for tax purposes, there's two values we're looking at for agricultural assets, for example. There's an agricultural value, which could be here, and there's a market value, which could be here. And sometimes the planning has to be about the gap in between. How are you going to minimise the tax take on your assets? So it's understanding that, being clear about who owns what. And you might have to then go to Lisa and other lawyers to find that out. How are you holding those assets? How are you using those assets? How you're using assets is really key to understanding whether you qualify for the tax release. And then you've got the information you need to go to your professionals to sit down and have that discussion. But I think you need to have those conversations within the family. You need to be open and transparent with all the family. What do you want to do? Do you want to retire and step away from the business? Do you have children who want to come into the business and take it on? They might not want to take on all of it. We might have one child that wants to do the diversification and one wanting to do the farming. It's being honest with each other. But too many families I'm seeing, they don't want to have those conversations. It is because they're looking ahead to death. And some families haven't prepared for retirement. So I think the earlier you start thinking about succession and passing your business on, the more options you give yourself. Too often we have members turning up, ringing me up, they've had a terminal diagnosis. At that point, the options are very limited from a tax perspective.
Can I just add something there? Because most of what we're focusing on here, as we both alluded to, is post, what will happen post-death. But we are all living longer, and we have a greater understanding of age-related conditions such as dementia. And so loss of mental capacity of a key member of the business can be as, if not more, catastrophic than an unplanned death. So it's not just about planning for death, it's about making sure that the business is sufficiently robust that it could survive something like a loss of capacity of a key member.
And when we talk about documentation and succession, we are also, talking about things like power of attorney.
Absolutely,
as well.
Yeah.
And that is something that people can do right now. My parents have actually just done it.
Yeah, I've done it. I sit here, I won't tell you quite how old I am, but I think I'm at the younger end of the demographic that has done powers of attorney. But, I spend a lot of time on the road. I've got a son at home who needs feeding and clothing regardless of what happens to me. So, yeah, powers of attorney, absolutely crucial. If you don't have them and there's a loss of capacity, then the only way to deal with that is an application to the Court of Protection, which costs a phenomenal amount, takes a ridiculously long period of time at a time of, let's face it, crisis. So don't leave that to chance.
And actually, we're holding a series of succession planning roadshows around the country. We had the first ones last week in the Southwest. And I heard an example there which really illustrates the importance of having powers of attorney, perhaps even at a much younger age than you would think, because there was a lady there who was talking about having to deal with the Court of Protection for 30 years because her sister had an accident and had lost capacity. And that was a lot, as you say, very time consuming and very expensive. And if you think about it, those costs are going to have to come out of the family coffers, come out of business perhaps. So I think we all need powers of attorney.
And these conversations, as you've just talked about, are extremely sensitive. It's considering your own mortality, which, yeah, let's face it, no one really wants to start that conversation. But it does have to start somewhere, doesn't it? Really practically, if you're perhaps maybe the younger generation who want to start having that awkward conversation with your parents, what are the top tips of how to actually get those people in a room, get the right people in a room, and then start that quite thorny conversation, and how not to make it thorny?
I think how not to make it thorny, don't do it over the Christmas dinner table. The time of year that's coming up, that's probably not the conversation we want to be having. I think for me, one of the other things that makes people nervous about handing stuff on is they're not convinced that the next generation is genuinely interested. So I think if you're the younger generation looking to persuade mum and dad to start having these conversations, it's about showing a genuine interest. I have got, talk about, harvest and what's happened and the cost of inputs and all, and try and show that you are wanting to gain a genuine understanding of how this business works and what your role in it could be in the future. And probably if you do that, the difficult stuff will start to happen organically. If it doesn't, and there's still a little bit of burying your head in the sand about it, at least you've got a lot of information, a lot of understanding to frank then the conversation that you want to have that may be a little bit more difficult about, well, what's going to happen when you're no longer here? Because I now know all of this about the business and I feel that I'm well equipped to take it on. What do you think?
I think there's a real issue as well. The older generation can be very stubborn. And there's a lack of trust. And actually, you've got to get over that lack of trust in the next generation. Because, I know we hear it, I don't want to hand it on, it might lose it in divorce. But actually, if you think about it, if you jointly own assets with your spouse, one of you was the in-law at the beginning of your married life. And so your parents or your spouse's parents had to trust you at that point when they were handing on to you. But there are tools available if you do really worry.
The stuff that we can do, if that really is a genuine concern and we really do need to build some genuine and robust asset protection into these plans, we can do that. It's just about, again, being frank with your advisors as well as to what your concerns are. And one of the reasons that I really like working in this sphere is I really like getting under the skin of a family and finding out exactly, partly inherent nosiness, but also because I can do the best job for you if I fully understand every skeleton in the closet, and then we can put in place the protection that you need.
It's such a tricky part of this conversation, and I hear it a lot. But people perhaps who have gone into family businesses and partnerships without prenuptial agreements. However, it's not too late, is it? Because there are protections with postnuptial agreement. Because I know this is something that quietly does stop people having this conversation, and no one really wants to say it. But it is one of the barriers, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. And yeah, what you're alluding to there is a postnuptial agreement. And yes, they're as possible. It's a very similar process to a prenuptial agreement, to be honest with you. But that's one of the tools in the arsenal that we can use for asset protection. But actually, people are coming around to those kind of concepts a little bit more now. It isn't quite the taboo subject. It doesn't happen like you see it on EastEnders, where the bride's signing the prenup in her wedding dress on the way to the church. There's a proper process to be gone through. But if that proper process is gone through, these documents can be invaluable.
And I think we've got to think about the business documents as well, because if you're going to bring the children into a partnership, for example, make sure you've got your agreement. And then you can use that agreement to set out what happens about taking assets out. And then you can then say, right, if they haven't got married yet, this is what you're going to have to do to bring you into the partnership. You're going to have to think about that prenup. You're going to have that discussion with the spouse you're bringing in. So I think as I said, there's a lot of tools. And I think that just leads us on naturally to the fact of making sure you've got your business documents up to date. And if you have got a partnership and you don't have an agreement, you've got the practicalities of that partnership coming to an end because of an old act that came in when Victoria was on the throne from 1890 that says without an agreement, that partnership comes to an end. Think about the practicalities for your business. You're going to have to then think about new bank accounts. What's going to happen to your financing? What about your government payments for grants and the like? You don't want that. Make sure you've got an agreement in place that's up to date. And this is where Lisa would come in to help you bring that together. And that can be as flexible as you like to deal with your own personal business and family circumstances.
What I'm seeing a lot of at the moment, certainly in the last sort of 2 to 3 years, is banks are insisting that people have partnership agreements in place and that those agreements are registered with the bank. And irritating that though that may seem, if you are in that situation, you will be thankful for it later down the line. A partnership agreement is there for when things aren't going okay.
So I was going to say, I started life as a commercial litigator. Most of that litigation was because people wouldn't pay for advice to get advice on the agreements they were entering into. They might have done it on a handshake. It would all go wrong, and then they had to pay an awful lot more to put it right. This is exactly the same with succession planning. You need to actually pay for proper advice from people who are experienced in the field. Too often I see, for example, accounts that aren't fit for purpose because they don't marry up with a partnership agreement, because they're with a firm who say they understand the agricultural sector, but they don't even understand all the rules about agricultural property relief. So if in doubt and you're a member, ask us who we can refer you to.
And that's an important point, isn't it, about advice? So since last October, the message has been seek advice, but seek the right advice. And unfortunately, we have heard of cases where people have talked to, advisors who aren't particularly clued up on the quite unique nature of some of these farming businesses, especially those that are diversified and have maybe been quick to sign up to advice that might not be the right advice. What would your advice be to somebody like that who's thinking, well, I was told to get advice, I've gone and done it, and actually I don't think it's the right thing for my business. Is it too late?
No, it's absolutely not too late. It's very rarely too late. What I'm seeing, certainly in the legal professional world, is that there have been a lot of smaller firms out there who have historically looked after agricultural clients and probably done an okay job of it in the past, but are now coming to realise just how specialised this area of practice is. And that's one of the reasons behind our firm's decision to create a specialist team just working in this sphere. What I have seen in the last year is some of those smaller firms realising this and referring or saying to clients, look, this is a bit beyond my field of expertise now. I think you need to go and speak to somebody specialist. But if you're very loyal to an advisor because perhaps they've advised the family for generations, I do understand the discomfort about having that conversation. I don't think you'll be advisor for me going forward. But most professionals were pretty thick-skinned. We don't take it personally. And I get up in the morning because I want to do the best job for my clients. And if that means me saying, I'm not the person for you, I will say I'm not the person for you. And I'd like to think other professionals are the same.
And a really important point, Louise, is around advice and not seeing it as another cost. It's quite an integral part of the business piece now, isn't it? And
I think it's essential. But of course, our members can get advice from us for free. But obviously, because we advise and don't act, we won't draw up the docket for you. You will still need your professionals. But actually, that is a cost saving that we can help with. And, as I said, we've got a lot of professional firms in membership. So we do know who the experts are in this sector and can refer people across to the local firms for them.
Yeah, my favourite saying at the moment is professional advice is an investment in your business, not an extent of it.
Yeah, I think people are very, very of an extra cost. Yeah. And in terms of the grants that we've seen, people having to pay for advice to get the grant, but it's almost like can't afford not to.
Yeah.
It's probably a message that we should be sending out.
Yeah, I can say, I know that solicitors in the past have had a bad press with regards to costs, and I can wear all of that. I promise you to make more out of people that don't do it than do.
Well, that's quite a sobering message, isn't it? Does anyone have any questions before we move on to the final part of the session? No? Yeah, there's a gentleman here, Sean. I see. Yeah, then you should be able to hear you.
Is the gifting of assets still a method which is used? And what are kind of some of the issues which you would advise around that?
Yeah, so gifting in the 7-year-old.
I think it's a more important factor now. I wasn't doing tax the last time we didn't have 100% relief. The 100% relief for APR and BPR came in the 90s. And I was speaking to somebody who was practicing back then who said gifting was an important strategy back then. And I think it's back on the table. Getting that clock running, which is why if you've had a terminal diagnosis, you haven't got that option available to you because you're unlikely to live that 7 years. And there is insurance products to help, and we've just launched one at the CLA for our members called Succession Insurance, which we hope will be cheaper than the rest of the market. But that's there to help cover any inheritance tax bill if you don't get through that 7 years. So I think gifting is part of the strategy going forward because of these changes. And I think it's going to be a more important strategy for families going forward.
Yeah, I would agree. We are looking at it more and more. What I'm doing work with some families because we don't want to make it too tax driven, but we've not just got inheritance tax to consider when we're gifting, we've got capital gains tax as well. And if you gift, I'm going to use a very arbitrary example of a field. Okay, yes, it starts the 7-year clock running for inheritance tax purposes, but what are we going to do about the capital gain? More often than not, we hold that over, so the recipient inherits the gain as well as the field. And what some people are looking at is where we can shift maximum value for IHT purposes whilst carrying minimum capital gain. And that's work that I do with the accountant. It does require, as Louise alluded to earlier, really well drawn up accounts with detailed fixed asset register to make that work. The other thing that I have been looking at with a couple of clients is where the older generation are farming and the younger generation are happy to keep it ticking over for now, but they know it's not their future and that the farm will likely be sold. Some people are making the deliberate decision not to gift because they would rather pay 20% inheritance tax than 20% capital gains tax, which they would have if they held over the gain and sold. So I think these solutions and whether gifting is the right thing to do or not has become more individual specific than perhaps it's ever been before. I hope that's answered your question.
Nods, yeah. Any more questions? One at the back here. What's a realistic timeline as well for succession planning? And what?
Well, the best time to start is today.
Like now.
And if the best time to start was yesterday, the next best time is today.
The sooner the best, but it's not too late.
Yeah.
The gentleman in the back.
So it's not so much a question as a point. My father, very clever man, did his own will. Split everything between my sister and I. She died when she was 51, unfortunately. Olivia, you should have a power of attorney in place as well as these two. In fact, everybody in the room should. So the point is making that when my father died, read the will, that my sister said, right, John, you've inherited everything. The way he'd written the will appeared to the layperson as though it was correct. But because Susan had died, my sister, I gained everything. That's not what they wanted, and I've done the right thing and we split everything. But the point is, you're not clever enough. We are not clever enough ourselves. We should support these people, bite the bullet, pay for their holiday till you get true back yourself.
Thank you.
Well, I think that's an excellent point. Thank you very much for making that. It's so important, isn't it? But again, it's about how to start that conversation, isn't it? And yes, as clever as you think you are,
I could do a whole half an hour session on the dangers of homemade wills, but that's not what we're here for. You make a very valid point.
But actually, it's important to have a will because the intestacy rules might mean that the assets don't go where you want them to go. And one of the questions that I often get is, what do I do? I can't tell members or tell you how you've got to leave your assets. You've got that testamentary freedom to give them where you want. And some people think I would be fair across all the children. But actually, because you've got business assets, all the children aren't going into the business. Being fair doesn't always have to mean equal, because that can cause problems if you have to divide things equally. And they've got to agree. What if they fall out? And I've seen the consequences of families when they've gone down a couple of generations and the cousins fall out. It creates an awful lot of expense at that point. So I think you've got to be very clear about how you're going to be equal. And this is where starting succession planning early, to be fair, might mean you have time to put money aside into some sort of financial product that fills up a pot of money the non-farming children can have, so that you're being fair even if you're not being equal.
We've looked at pension funds a lot in the past as a means of giving something to non-farming children. And just on that point about fairness that Louise made, I think one of the ways that I try and help explain it to clients is, if you see a number on a balance sheet, this is the value of your land, to you that is just a number. That's not cash. That's the value is almost meaningless. And if you pass that, I'm going to use an arbitrary figure of say £5 million. If you pass that £5 million balance sheet figure onto your farming child, they haven't received £5 million, have they? They've received the tools of the trade they need in order to continue the business. Contrast that if you've got a £1 million, I don't know, life policy or investment portfolio that the non-farming child can receive. Well, okay, the values look really distorted, 5 million here over 1 million here, but who's actually got the freedom there to go and do what they want? Because for this £1 million person, that's a windfall, and that they're not constrained by anything. And I think that's a really good illustration of that point, that to me, that's not an unfair outcome. But if we look to kind of pure balance sheets and figures analysis, it looks a little bit distorted.
And it's important to say, isn't it, that flexibility can be built into these agreements. They're not linear. It can be done, but again, it comes down to having the conversation. What are the most successful models that you two have seen? What's when it's gone well? We're sitting here with an audience where, in a diversification show where businesses now have various assets spread over the business portfolio. Can you take us through kind of a successful model for negotiating something that's, on the face of it, fairly complex?
Well, I would say that those who've actually spoken to their professionals, and I think a good way of doing it is to have all the professionals around the table. So as a family, you're having that discussion. They're there to help you have that discussion and tell you what you can and can't do from a legal and tax perspective, perhaps. And then they all know what your family goals are and what you want to achieve, and then they can help you to achieve it. And I think as a model for taking it forward, I think that would work very well.
Yeah, I love getting around the literal, well, metaphorical farmhouse table and getting all of the plans out and fully understanding which components of the business sit where on the farm generally, and then who is involved in little bits of the business. And so I can't remember whether it was Liv or Louise alluded to earlier, that sometimes you've got an individual who's really interested in running the diversified element of it, and then you've got somebody who just wants to be in the fields doing. And allow those as part of your plan. Look at where everybody's strengths lie, and it might be, well, have we got two viable businesses here? Is a strategy to in the future split them off, or do they need to remain sort of knitted together in order to be viable? But as Louise says, I feel you get best value out of your professionals if you get professionals, and by that I mean solicitor, land agent, accountant, who are all working together and able to work sort of side by side and in collaboration with each other. And then I feel that you get the best out of all of us. And I really love working with accountants and land agents because they will pick up on points that wouldn't immediately be obvious to me. I will pick up on points that aren't immediately obvious to them. And then between us all, we can find the route through.
And one thing that's going to be important going forward, because of the changes to the inheritance tax that was announced for the budget, and obviously there might still be scope for a few tweaks to that. We're still pushing hard as an organisation for changes, and we're not going to know until we get to the budget and actually see the finance bill published and going through Parliament. But one of the factors that's going to be really important is understanding the market value of all of your assets. What we've seen really is that, you get your land values done because, you need to understand the agricultural market values of the land and the buildings of the farm. And traditionally, because you had 100% business property leaf if you're farming a hand or, running a trading business, HMRC would accept your book values. But that's not going to be good enough anymore. Those book values are going to be historic. You're going to need market values of a lot more assets. You're going to need to have more professionals instructed and somebody passes away to get those. So it might be your accountant doing, some of the business assets. You might need to get different people in to value your farm machinery. So there's a lot more things. If you're a business where you're doing the added value to your dairy products, and you're creating ice cream that's got a market locally or even wider, you might have a brand. That's an intangible asset you're going to need to value. So there's a lot more to think about when somebody in the business passes away at holding business assets. And the one thing I would really please, as difficult at times as it is when somebody passes away, don't dilly-dally waiting to get the valuers in to do that market value. The further they are away from the date of death, the harder it is going to be to get those market values right for the purposes of going into probate. And of course, you've got to make that first payment. Government's very quick to talk about, it's okay, you can pay that inheritance tax charge over a 10-year period. But you've got to make that first payment 9 months after the date of death. You've got to have an idea of what the values of those business assets are to be able to do that, and even to raise the finance to do that. So I think that's a really practical point to be aware of.
It is, and you just mentioned the budget there, Louise. A couple of weeks' time, quick prediction on what we're expecting from the Chancellor?
Well, it's very difficult to predict. There's been so much speculation of the last few weeks that we've definitely been keeping an eye on. I've got a lot of documents I've prepared with my arguments to hit back with, like I did last year.
More tax wouldn't be a surprise.
I know. I think more tax is an inevitability because there's so much more spending and borrowing to pay for. But I think she set the scene for breaking the manifesto promise for income tax. When she talked about on Tuesday morning about everybody having to pay, I think she's trying to set the scene for an income tax. And that's going to raise the biggest chunk of money, much more than tweaking with capital gains tax again, doing any more tweaks to inheritance tax, doing any tweaks to charges on property. And one of the big taxes is how you're going to get a bigger chunk of money. So don't be surprised if we see changes to the income tax rates.
Okay, thank you, Louise. And just to remind everybody that Louise is speaking specifically on tax at 11:15 at the CLA stand. And also, Lisa, just to remind everybody that we've got our free legal help desk, which comes when you join Farmers Guardian's digital membership. So please do come and see us at the stand over there. I just want to say thank you so much for you two. I've really enjoyed our discussion, and I hope you guys have as well. So thank you for your participation and have a good show. Thank you.